Full Employment and Price Stability by Warren Mosler. Conclusion. It is widely assumed that deficit spending to hire unemployed workers carries at least two risks: inflation and funding. The inflation risk comes from the failure to understand exogenous pricing. It is feared that deficit spending will cause an implied upward bias on labor costs from both the aggregate demand created by the deficit spending and the elimination of the competition of the unemployed for available jobs. The result is an anti-inflation policy that requires excess capacity in the private sector to keep market prices from rising. This includes the need to maintain a pool of unemployed to discourage wages from rising. The second perceived risk, funding, comes from the widely held misconception that the government must be able to fund itself to carry on spending. The government is, therefore, concerned not only with how the market will receive the debt it believes it needs to sell in order to fund itself, but also concerned that there may be a market-determined funding limit. Until these perceptions change, a pool of unemployed workers will be necessary to contain inflation, and deficit spending will be resisted. The Keynesian mainstream proposes ending unemployment by increasing aggregate demand through low interest rates and increased deficit spending. To offset the inflation risk inherent in this policy, many Keynesians propose various government-legislated income policies. These require the direct government regulation of private sector wages, usually attempting to link wages with productivity. This has been rejected by the electorate, who seem to prefer the excess capacity approach to price stability. The proposed employer of last resort program recognizes that the government is a monopoly supplier of its currency. Price is set through the employer of last resort wage, which defines the purchasing power of the currency. Further recognized is that deficit spending poses no financial solvency risk to the government. The government, as employer of last resort, is not a new concept. What prevented such policies from being viable and sustainable in the past, the gold standard and other fixed exchange rate policies, are long gone. We currently have a monetary system that can accommodate both full employment and price stability on a permanent basis. This employer of last resort proposal is a logical extension of Keynesian and post-Keynesian thought. Endogenous money is already deeply rooted, and the idea that an incomes policy need only be practiced by the government with its employer of last resort wage should not pose any philosophical barriers. Nor should classical economists and their offspring be entirely against such an employer of last resort program. If they are correct, there would eventually be an equilibrium condition, with the employer of last resort pool dwindling to zero.